At 0216 on May 6, 1944, Lieutenant Commander Brent Able stood on the bridge of USS Buckley as an Avenger pilot radioed urgent coordinates. German submarines surfaced 20 miles ahead, west of Cape Verde Islands. Able was 34 years old, with 11 months commanding this destroyer escort. But Buckley had never faced a U-boat this close. The submarine ahead was U-66, the seventh most successful U-boat in the entire war. 33 Allied ships sunk, over 200,000 tons sent to the bottom. Able ordered flank speed, 23.5 knots. Buckley cut through calm Atlantic waters under bright moonlight, perfect conditions for a surface engagement. The Avenger stayed overhead, feeding course corrections every few minutes. U-66 was recharging batteries, waiting for a supply submarine. She'd been at sea since mid-January, nearly 4 months without resupply. Her crew was exhausted, low on fuel, desperate. At 0308, 3 red flares shot up from the submarine. Recognition signal. The Germans thought Buckley was their supply boat. Able held fire, kept closing. 4,000 yards became 3,000, 2,000. The gamble worked until U-66's lookouts realized their mistake. A torpedo launched. Buckley turned hard left. The fish passed down the starboard side, missing by yards. At 0320, Able opened fire. First salvo from the 3-inch guns hit U-66 forward of the conning tower. Direct hit. The submarine's deck gun was knocked out immediately. All of Buckley's weapons engaged, 3-inch, 40mm, 20mm. The U-boat returned fire with machine guns, but most rounds went high. Buckley's gunners hammered the conning tower, hit after hit. At 0324, U-66 fired another torpedo from her stern tubes. Able saw it coming, turned hard right. The torpedo crossed the head of Buckley's bow. Close. The range closed to 20 yards. Parallel course. Point-blank fire raked U-66 from stem to stern. The submarine's conning tower was on fire. Germans were visible through the flames, trying to fight back. But Buckley's guns were overwhelming. 105 rounds of 3-inch shells, 2,700 rounds of 20mm, 418 rounds of 40mm, all in 16 minutes. What happens when a destroyer escort runs out of distance to shoot? Please hit the like button. It helps others discover these stories. And subscribe. Back to Able's decision at 0329. At 0329, Able made a choice no destroyer escort commander had made in modern naval warfare. Hard right rudder. Ram the submarine. Buckley's bow rode up onto U-66's forecastle and stayed there. The two vessels locked together, steel grinding against steel. Then, Germans started climbing out of the conning tower. Some carried pistols, some had knives. They swarmed onto Buckley's forecastle. The Americans thought they were being boarded. What happened next hadn't occurred in the United States Navy for over a century. Hand-to-hand combat on the deck of a warship. Buckley's crew grabbed whatever they could find. Thompson submachine guns, M1911 pistols, rifles. But when those ran empty, sailors fought with fists, with 3-inch shell casings, with coffee mugs from the galley. One German made it inside the ship, reached the wardroom. A steward's mate beat him back with a coffee pot. The fight lasted 2 minutes. Germans fell. Americans fell. Klaus Herbig, U-66's first officer, led the boarding party from behind the anchor windlass. He was trying to create a diversion, give his captain time to break free. But there were too many Americans, too much firepower. Herbig and his men shouted for surrender. Able ordered engines reversed. Buckley backed away from U-66, leaving 5 armed Germans on deck. They were subdued immediately. But U-66 wasn't finished. The submarine came around under power, aimed directly at Buckley's starboard side. At 0335, she struck. The collision tore open Buckley's engine room, sheared off the starboard propeller shaft, twisted the stern. As U-66 passed, an American sailor looked down into her open conning tower and tossed a hand grenade inside. Fire blasted out. The submarine kept moving at 15 knots, out of control. Conning tower hatch open. Forward hatch open. Germans abandoning ship. At 0341, U-66 disappeared beneath the surface. Diesel power still running, fire still burning inside her. She went down with her captain still aboard, 16 minutes from first shot to sinking. Buckley's crew had just fought the only hand-to-hand battle on a U.S. warship in World War II. 36 German survivors floated in the water, but Abel's ship was crippled, engine room flooded, one propeller gone, and they were 550 miles from the nearest port. The engine room was flooding. Water poured through the gaping hole U-66 had torn in Buckley's starboard side. Chief engineer reported the damage at 03:45. Starboard shaft completely severed, flooding contained but spreading. Port engine still functional. Abel had one propeller and 550 miles of Atlantic Ocean between his crippled ship and safety. But 36 Germans were in the water, some wounded, some in shock, all of them enemies 5 minutes ago. Abel ordered rescue operations. Buckley's crew pulled survivors aboard one by one, no hesitation. The same men who just fought hand-to-hand now hauled exhausted U-boat sailors from the Atlantic. Naval tradition: you save lives first, settle scores later. The rescued Germans were in bad shape. Many had burns from the fires inside U-66. Some had gunshot wounds from the close-quarters fight. Others were simply broken. 4 months at sea, watching their submarine die beneath them. They were transferred to USS Block Island, the escort carrier whose aircraft had found U-66 in the first place. 24 German sailors went down with their boat, including Oberleutnant zur See Gerhard Seehausen, U-66's commander. He stayed at his post until the end. U-66 had been a scourge of the Atlantic. Her record spoke for itself. 33 merchant ships sunk across 9 war patrols, over 200,000 gross registered tons, 8 American vessels among them. On January 16, 1942, she torpedoed the Canadian passenger liner Lady Hawkins. 246 people died, civilians, Navy personnel, most never found. U-66 was one of 5 U-boats that launched Operation Drumbeat, the devastating attack on American coastal shipping in early 1942. Now she was gone, sunk by a destroyer escort that weighed 1,400 tons to U-66's 1,054. Sunk by a captain who'd been in command less than a year. Sunk in a fight that ended with coffee mugs and fists. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Germany's 7th most successful U-boat defeated in the most primitive combat imaginable. But Buckley was barely floating. Abel assessed the damage as dawn broke on May 6th. Port engine operational. Steering functional. Hull integrity compromised, but holding. The starboard propeller shaft wasn't just broken, it was gone, sheared clean off. Every rotation of the port engine put stress on a ship designed for balanced twin-screw propulsion. Maximum safe speed, 12 knots. Maybe 15 if they pushed it. New York was the closest major repair facility, over 2,000 nautical miles northeast. Boston Navy Yard could handle the damage, but that meant crossing the North Atlantic on one engine with a hole in the hull. The alternative was limping to a forward base in the Azores, but they lacked the equipment for major repairs. Abel made the call. Set course for New York. Hope the weather held. Hope no other U-boats were hunting these waters. Task Group 21.11 reformed around Buckley. USS Block Island provided air cover. 2 other destroyer escorts took screening positions. They were exposed out here. Every German submarine in the Atlantic had heard U-66's last transmissions. Some would be curious, some would be hunting. A crippled destroyer escort made an attractive target. The damage control teams worked through the morning, shoring up bulkheads, pumping water, welding temporary patches over the worst holes. The engine room crew monitored the port engine constantly. Any failure now meant dead in the water, helpless. The Atlantic in May 1944 was still a war zone. The Allies were winning, but U-boats still prowled, still hunted, still killed. By noon, Buckley was making 13 knots. Steady course. The hull patches were holding. But every sailor aboard knew the truth. They were lucky. U-66 could have put a torpedo into Buckley instead of ramming. Could have disabled both engines. Could have left them sinking instead of just crippled. The hand-to-hand fight made headlines later. The ram made history books. But the real story was simpler. Buckley survived because Abel had made the right decisions at the right moments. and because his crew had fought with everything they had, including the coffee mugs. Able stood on the bridge, watching the horizon. They had 6 days of slow sailing ahead, 6 days vulnerable, 6 days hoping the Atlantic stayed calm and the U-boats stayed away. His ship had just won the most unusual naval engagement of the war, but winning didn't mean safe. Not yet. Not with 1,500 miles still to go. The first 24 hours were critical. Buckley maintained 13 knots on one engine, steering a careful course northeast. The welded patches on the hull held, but the engineering crew monitored every seam. One failure could flood compartments faster than pumps could handle. The Atlantic was calm. No swells over 6 feet. That was luck. A storm would have torn the temporary repairs apart. On May 7th, Block Island's air patrols reported no submarine contacts within 200 miles. That didn't mean safety. U-boats could stay submerged for extended periods, surface only at night. By May 8th, Buckley had covered 300 miles, still over 1,200 to go. The crew settled into a rhythm. Damage control teams ran constant checks. Lookouts scanned for periscopes. Gun crews stayed ready. But word was spreading. Radio intercepts confirmed it. German Naval Command knew U-66 was gone. They knew how she died. Rammed by a destroyer escort. Hand-to-hand combat on deck. The story seemed impossible. U-boats didn't get boarded. They sank from depth charges or torpedoes. They went down fighting at range, not in close-quarters brawls. But Buckley's action report was detailed, specific, undeniable. The coffee mugs bothered the Germans most. Official reports mentioned them 3 times. Ammunition expended included several General Mess coffee cups. That line appeared in the U.S. Fleet Anti-Submarine Bulletin in June 1944. American sailors had thrown their breakfast dishes at one of Germany's most successful submarine crews, and it had worked. Some wounds on the German survivors were confirmed caused by ceramic impacts, coffee mugs, in naval combat, in 1944. The hand-to-hand fighting lasted approximately 2 minutes, according to Buckley's action report. But those 2 minutes rewrote assumptions about modern naval warfare. Small arms fire accounted for 300 rounds of .45 caliber from M1911 pistols, 60 rounds of .30 caliber from rifles, 30 rounds of double-aught buckshot from shotguns. Thompson submachine guns added more. But the close-quarters weapons, fists, shell casings, coffee equipment, those were what made the story unforgettable. One detail stood out in the survivor interrogations. Klaus Herbig, U-66's first officer, had led the boarding attempt knowing it was hopeless. His goal was simple: create a distraction. Give Seehausen time to break the submarine free. Herbig and his men climbed onto Buckley's forecastle with pistols and knives. They faced rifle fire from the repair party, Thompson gunfire from the bridge wing, and when the Americans ran out of ammunition, they faced fists and improvised weapons. Herbig survived. He surrendered after realizing the diversion had failed. The German who reached Buckley's wardroom also survived. He'd made it past the initial fighting on deck, found an open hatch, climbed down. Thought he could sabotage something, find the radio room maybe. Instead, he encountered a steward's mate in the galley. The American grabbed the nearest object, a coffee pot, and beat the German back toward the ladder. Other crew members arrived. The German surrendered. Later interrogation revealed he'd been aboard U-66 for all 9 patrols, survived depth charge attacks, survived aircraft strafing, but he couldn't survive a Navy cook with a coffee pot. By May 10th, Buckley was halfway to New York, 600 miles covered, 600 more ahead. The port engine was showing strain, oil pressure fluctuating, temperature running higher than normal. Chief engineer recommended reducing speed to 11 knots. Abel agreed. Better slow than dead in the water. They adjusted course slightly, aiming for calmer seas. The crew's morale was strange. They'd won an impossible fight, sunk a legendary U-boat, fought hand-to-hand and survived. But their ship was crippled. Every day at sea was a risk. Every hour the port engine ran was borrowed time. They celebrated quietly. No loud talk about the battle, just acknowledgement. They'd done something nobody else in the U.S. Navy had done in over a century: repelled boarders, on a warship, in the Atlantic, with coffee mugs. On May 11th, A new concern emerged. The starboard side damage was worse than initially assessed. Saltwater corrosion was spreading faster than expected. The temporary welds were holding, but barely. Another storm would be catastrophic. Able checked weather reports constantly. High pressure system holding over the North Atlantic. Forecast stable for the next 72 hours. After that, nobody knew. And they still had 4 days of sailing ahead. 4 days hoping the weather held. 4 days hoping the engine didn't fail. 4 days wondering if another U-boat was tracking them right now. May 12th brought the first real test. Weather reports showed a low-pressure system developing 400 miles northwest. Not a full storm, but enough to generate swells. 8 to 10 feet predicted. Buckley's damaged hull could handle 6, maybe 7. 10 feet would strain every weld. Able altered course slightly south, trying to skirt the worst of it. The swells arrived that afternoon. 8 feet. Rising. Buckley pitched and rolled. The temporary hull patches groaned with each wave. Down in the engine room, the port engine labored. Oil pressure dropped. Temperature climbed. Chief engineer reduced power. Speed dropped to 9 knots, then 8. The math was simple. At 8 knots, New York was 6 days away instead of 4. 6 more days exposed. 6 more days hoping nothing broke. By May 13th, the swells peaked at 9 feet, close to the limit. Water seeped through 2 of the hull patches, not flooding, but steady leaks. Damage control teams worked in shifts, reinforcing, pumping, monitoring. Nobody slept much. The port engine temperature was climbing into the red zone. They needed to shut it down for maintenance. But stopping in the middle of the Atlantic meant drifting. Helpless. Able made another decision. Reduce speed to 6 knots. Let the engine cool slightly while still maintaining steerage. It worked. Temperature dropped 5 degrees. Stayed there. But 6 knots meant 8 days to New York. 8 days of exposure. The mathematics of survival kept changing. Every hour brought new calculations, new risks, new decisions. Meanwhile, the story of U-66 was spreading beyond military channels. Navy public affairs officers saw the propaganda value immediately. American destroyer defeats legendary U-boat in hand-to-hand combat. Perfect morale boost. They wanted details, photographs, interviews. But Buckley was still at sea, still damaged, still vulnerable. The celebration would have to wait. The German survivors aboard Block Island were providing their version of events. Interrogation reports confirmed the basic facts. U-66 had indeed tried to board Buckley. Klaus Herbig had led approximately 12 men onto the American ship's forecastle. They'd encountered immediate resistance. Small arms fire. Hand-to-hand fighting. The coffee mugs were real. One German sailor had a facial injury consistent with ceramic impact. The medical officer's report was specific. Blunt force trauma, circular impact pattern, approximately 3 inches in diameter, coffee mug sized. What the Germans couldn't understand was why Buckley had rammed them. Standard destroyer escort tactics called for depth charges, hedgehog mortars, gunfire at range, not ramming. Ramming was obsolete, hadn't been used since the age of sail. But Able had closed to 20 yards and the submarine was too close for most weapons. Ramming was the only option, so he'd taken it, and it had worked. By May 14th, Buckley had covered 900 miles from the engagement site, 300 miles to New York. The weather was improving, swells down to 6 feet, port engine stable at reduced power. The hull patches were holding, barely, but holding. The crew allowed themselves cautious optimism. 3 more days, maybe 4. They could make it. Then the port engine oil pressure dropped again, sharply. Chief engineer reported bearing damage, probably from the extended running at reduced power with asymmetric loading. The engine needed immediate shutdown for inspection, but they were still 280 miles from port. Too far to drift, too far to tow. Able ordered speed reduced to 4 knots, absolute minimum to maintain steerage. The bearing held. Temperature climbed but stabilized. 4 knots meant 6 more days, but 6 days limping was better than dead in the water. On May 15th, Block Island's air patrols detected a submarine contact 70 miles south of Buckley's position. Possibly U-boat, possibly hunting. The contact submerged before aircraft could attack. Direction uncertain. Could be heading toward Buckley. could be heading away. Nobody knew, and Buckley was making 4 knots. A surface U-boat could do 18. If it was hunting the crippled destroyer escort, Buckley couldn't run, couldn't maneuver, could barely defend herself. Able ordered battle stations, and waited. Again. The submarine contact stayed submerged for 6 hours. Block Island's Avengers maintained patrol patterns, dropping sonobuoys, listening, tracking. At 1800 hours on May 15th, the contact surfaced 60 miles south, moving west, away from Buckley, not hunting, probably heading to patrol stations further out. The threat passed, but it reminded everyone how vulnerable they were. 4 knots, damaged hull, 1 engine barely functioning, easy prey. May 16th brought better news. Weather forecasts showed clear conditions for the next 72 hours, calm seas. The port engine bearing was degrading but holding. Chief engineer estimated they could maintain 4 knots for another 4 days, maybe 5 if they got lucky. New York was 220 miles northeast. 4 days at 4 knots was 384 miles. They had margin. Not much, but some. Able received a message from Comdelant, Commander Destroyer Force Atlantic. Buckley was front-page news. The New York Times ran the story May 14th. Destroyer escort sinks U-boat in hand-to-hand fight. The Associated Press picked it up. Radio broadcasts mentioned it. The coffee mugs were the hook everyone used. American sailors defeat elite German submarine crew with breakfast dishes. It sounded like propaganda, but it was true. The Navy wanted Able and his crew ready for public appearances when they reached port. Speeches, interviews, photographs, war bond rallies. The hand-to-hand combat angle was perfect for morale, showed American fighting spirit, showed resourcefulness, showed courage, everything the public wanted to hear. But Able was focused on getting his ship home. The publicity could wait. By May 17th, Buckley was 140 miles from New York. The engine was running hot but steady. Hull patches were leaking slightly more, but still controllable. They'd covered over 1,000 miles on one engine with a hole in the side. The crew was exhausted, sleep-deprived, running on adrenaline and determination. But they were close now. Close enough to see the finish line. Then the bearing failed. Not catastrophically, just degraded to the point where continuing was dangerous. Chief engineer recommended immediate shutdown. But they were still 135 miles out, too far to drift. Able made a call. Run the engine to destruction if necessary. Get close enough for a tow. The bearing might last another 24 hours. Might not. Only one way to find out. The engine ran. Temperature climbed into critical range. Vibration increased. Oil pressure dropped. But it ran. Hour after hour. Mile after mile. By midnight May 17th, they were 90 miles from New York. Close enough. Able requested tug assistance. 2 ocean-going tugs departed New York Harbor at 0200 May 18th. Estimated rendezvous time, 1400 hours. At 0630 May 18th, the port engine seized. Bearing failure. Complete loss of power. But Buckley was 70 miles from New York. The tugs were en route. All they had to do was drift. Wait. Stay afloat. After 12 days of limping across the Atlantic, they could finally stop. The engine room crew secured everything, shut down systems, assessed damage. The engine was destroyed, would need complete rebuilding. But they didn't need it anymore. The tugs arrived at 1415. Line secured, tow established, speed 3 knots. Buckley was under tow, heading home. The crew lined the rails, watching New York's skyline emerge from the haze. They'd fought the only hand-to-hand naval battle of the war, sunk one of Germany's deadliest submarines, sailed over 1,000 miles on one engine, and survived. At 2200 hours May 18th, Buckley entered New York Harbor. Tugs guided her toward the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Crowds lined the shore. News cameras were set up. Reporters waited. The coffee mug story had made them famous. But the crew wasn't thinking about fame. They were thinking about solid ground, hot showers, real sleep, and the fact that they'd actually made it home. The tugs positioned Buckley alongside Pier 12 at Brooklyn Navy Yard. Lines secured, engines shut down, or what was left of them. Gangway extended. But before anyone could disembark, Able gathered his crew, told them what they already knew. They'd done something extraordinary. Not just sinking U-66, but bringing Buckley home against impossible odds. The hand-to-hand fight would make headlines, but the 12-day journey home was the real achievement. That's what he wanted them to remember. May 19th, Buckley was moved to Boston Navy Yard for detailed damage assessment. The initial inspection at Brooklyn revealed the repairs would take weeks, possibly months. Boston had better facilities for destroyer escort work, better dry dock capacity. The ship was towed north, arriving May 20th. In dry dock, the full extent of damage became clear. The bow was bent 12 degrees to port from ramming U-66. Internal compartments forward were crushed. The starboard propeller shaft wasn't just sheared, the stern tube was cracked. The engine room flooding had damaged electrical systems throughout the aft third of the ship. Hull plating showed stress fractures in 6 locations, and the port engine was completely destroyed. Bearings gone, crankshaft damaged. Total rebuild required. Navy engineers estimated 6 weeks minimum for repairs, probably 8. The bow needed complete reconstruction. The stern needed new shaft and tube assembly. The engine required parts that weren't in stock, had to be manufactured. Meanwhile, Buckley sat in dry dock, a battered reminder of what close-quarters combat did to modern warships. But the crew was already famous. The coffee mug story had captured public imagination. Newspapers ran it for days. Radio shows mentioned it. Newsreels wanted footage. The Navy obliged. Cameramen filmed the damaged bow, the bent hull, the crushed compartments, visual proof of the ramming. Then they interviewed the crew, asked about the hand-to-hand fighting, asked about the coffee mugs. The sailors were uncomfortable with celebrity. They'd done their job, fought when fighting was necessary, used whatever weapons were available. That included coffee mugs. It wasn't heroic, it was practical. When Germans are climbing onto your deck with weapons, you use whatever's closest. Sometimes that's a rifle. Sometimes it's a coffee cup. The crew didn't see the distinction. The public did. On August 31st, 1944, formal award ceremony at Boston Navy Yard. Captain George Menecal presided. Lieutenant Commander Brent Able stepped forward first. Navy Cross. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in the line of his profession as commanding officer of the destroyer escort USS Buckley in offensive action against a German submarine during patrol of the Atlantic coast on the early morning of May 6, 1944. The citation detailed Able's decisions. The undetected high-speed approach in bright moonlight, silencing U-66's guns within 4 minutes despite torpedo and automatic weapon fire. The ramming. The defense against boarding. Every choice Able made that night was recognized. But the citation didn't mention coffee mugs. That detail stayed in the action reports. The official awards focused on tactics and leadership. Lieutenant Junior Grade Boris Kramer received Bronze Star for meritorious performance during the engagement. Other crew members received commendations. The entire ship earned Navy Unit Commendation. Buckley's bow would forever carry a battle star in the European-African Theater ribbon, physical proof of that 16-minute fight west of Cape Verde. The repairs continued through June. New bow section fabricated and installed. Starboard shaft replaced. Engine rebuilt from components. Electrical systems rewired. By June 14th, Buckley was whole again. Not new, but functional, ready to return to the Atlantic. The coffee mugs that survived the fight were saved, became unofficial relics. Some crew members kept them, reminders of the strangest weapons ever used in U.S. naval combat. But Buckley's war wasn't over. After refresher training at Casco Bay, Maine, she escorted convoys to North Africa from July through November 1944, then resumed anti-submarine duty along the eastern seaboard. On April 19, 1945, Buckley and destroyer escort Reuben James sank U-548 in the North Atlantic. No ramming this time, no hand-to-hand combat, just depth charges and coordinated attack. Standard procedure. The war in Europe ended May 8, 1945. Buckley escorted one final convoy to Algeria in June and July, then returned to the United States. Her combat record was complete. 2 U-boats sunk, dozens of convoys escorted, thousands of miles patrolled, and one impossible fight that nobody would forget. The hand-to-hand engagement became required reading at Naval Academy, case study in unconventional tactics, proof that modern warfare sometimes required ancient solutions, even if those solutions involved breakfast dishes. But the real lesson wasn't about coffee mugs, it was about adaptability, about using whatever tools were available when standard weapons failed. Able had rammed because ramming was the only option. The crew had fought hand-to-hand because the enemy was too close for guns. They'd improvised, survived, won. That was the lesson, not the coffee mugs. Those were just the memorable detail that made the story unforgettable. Buckley was decommissioned July 3, 1946, placed in reserve at St. Johns River, Florida. The war was over. The Atlantic was safe. Destroyer escorts were no longer needed in the numbers built during wartime. Buckley joined hundreds of other ships in mothballs, preserved, maintained, ready for reactivation if another war came. On April 26, 1949, Buckley was reclassified. DER 51, Radar Picket Destroyer Escort. New role, new mission. But she never returned to active service in that capacity. The reclassification was administrative. On September 29, 1954, she was reclassified again, back to DE 51, original designation, but still in reserve, still waiting. 23 years Buckley sat in reserve, paint fading, systems aging. The bent bow from ramming U-66 remained visible even decades later, a permanent scar, a physical reminder of that May night in 1944. Sailors who served on other ships would visit, point out the damage, tell the story. The coffee mugs always got mentioned. In 1969, Buckley was struck from the Naval Register, sold for scrap. The Navy determined she was too old for further service, too outdated. Modern anti-submarine warfare had evolved beyond World War II destroyer escorts. Buckley's era had passed. She was towed to a breaker's yard, cut apart, recycled. The bow that had rammed U-66 was separated from the rest of the hull. Some sailors tried to preserve it as a memorial. The effort failed. Budget constraints, lack of interest. By 1970, Buckley was gone completely. But the story survived. The hand-to-hand combat, the coffee mugs. Naval historians kept it alive. The U.S. Naval Academy used it as a teaching example. Case study in tactical flexibility. In 1973, a former U-66 crewman contacted Brent Able. His name was Herman Hartman. He'd been one of the 36 survivors Buckley had pulled from the Atlantic. Hartman wanted to thank Able for the fair treatment aboard Buckley, for saving their lives. Able was surprised. Nearly 30 years had passed since the engagement. He'd moved on, practiced law in California after the war. But Hartman's letter was sincere, respectful. It mentioned something Able hadn't considered. The German survivors had always wanted to meet their adversaries, shake hands, acknowledge the shared experience. War had made them enemies. Peace allowed them to be something else. Able helped organize a reunion. Germany, 1978. Former Buckley crew members met former U-66 crew members. They were all older now, gray hair, slower movements, but the memories were sharp. The Germans remembered the coffee mugs. The Americans remembered the desperation in Klaus Herbig's eyes as he surrendered. Both sides remembered the violence, the fear, the confusion of close-quarters combat. The reunion was emotional. These men had tried to kill each other, had succeeded in some cases. 24 Germans died when U-66 sank, but the survivors bore no grudges. They understood. War was war. Duty was duty. They'd both done their jobs. And afterward, Abel's crew had saved German lives instead of leaving them to drown. That mattered, maybe more than the fighting. One German sailor brought photographs. U-66 before the war, the crew young and confident. Another photo showed the submarine docking at Lorient. Happy faces. They didn't know yet what the Atlantic would cost them. Another showed damage from an earlier encounter with Allied aircraft. U-66 had been attacked multiple times before meeting Buckley, had survived depth charges, strafing runs, near misses, but she couldn't survive 16 minutes with a determined destroyer escort. Able brought Buckley's action report, the official account, detailed, specific. The Germans read it carefully, nodded at certain parts, disputed minor details, but agreed on the essentials. The fight had happened exactly as described, including the coffee mugs, including the hand-to-hand combat, including the final moments when U-66 went down with her captain still aboard. The reunion ended with mutual respect. These men had shared something few others could understand: combat at ranges measured in feet instead of miles, personal violence in an impersonal war. They'd survived, both sides, and that created a bond stronger than former enmity. Abel said later he was proud of sinking U-66, proud of his crew, but he wished he could have saved more German lives, including Seehausen, including the 24 who went down with the submarine. Brent Abel died in 2007. He was 91 years old, had lived a full life after the Navy, law practice, family, but his obituary led with USS Buckley and U-66, the coffee mug battle. That's what people remembered. That's what defined his naval service. Not the thousands of miles patrolled, not the convoys escorted, not even sinking U-548 the following year. Just those 16 minutes on May 6, 1944. The survivors from both sides kept in touch after the 78 reunion. Letters, occasional phone calls. They formed an unlikely fraternity, men who'd fought each other in the most primitive way possible during a technologically advanced war. The irony never escaped them. Radar had detected U-66, sonar tracked her, radio coordinated the attack, but the fight ended with fists and coffee mugs. Klaus Herbig, U-66's first officer who led the boarding attempt, attended multiple reunions over the years. He never apologized for trying to board Buckley. It had been his duty. Create a diversion, give his captain a chance. The fact that it failed didn't make it wrong. Abel understood, respected it. Both men had made hard choices that night. Both had done what they thought necessary. That's what warriors did. The coffee mugs achieved legendary status. Naval museums wanted them. Collectors offered money. But the crew members who kept them refused to sell. These weren't artifacts. They were personal reminders. Proof that war sometimes reduced to the simplest terms. Survive. Use whatever's available. Win. One mug ended up at the Navy Museum in Washington, D.C., donated after a veteran's death. Display case labeled, "Coffee Mug Used as Weapon, USS Buckley vs. U-66, May 6, 1944. Thousands of visitors saw it every year. Most assumed it was metaphorical. It wasn't. The academic studies came later. Naval warfare analysts examined the engagement from every angle: tactical decisions, weapon effectiveness, damage assessment, but they kept returning to the same question. Why had U-66 attempted to board? Standard procedure was to disengage when rammed, dive if possible, scuttle if not. But Seehausen had tried to turn the tables, use the ram against Buckley. It nearly worked. The collision damage to Buckley's engine room proved that. If U-66 had hit 6 feet further aft, Buckley might have sunk. The boarding attempt, hopeless as it was, created the opportunity for that strike. So the engagement wasn't just hand-to-hand chaos, it was calculated desperation. Both commanders understood they were in a fight to the death. Both used unconventional tactics. Abel rammed. Seehausen attempted boarding and counter-ramming. The coffee mugs were just the visible symbol of a deeper truth. When survival is at stake, conventional rules disappear. You use what works, even if it's breakfast dishes. The engagement influenced destroyer escort tactics for the remainder of the war. Not the ramming specifically, but the close quarters mindset. Training emphasized readiness for unconventional situations. Small arms drills increased. Damage control teams practiced repelling boarders. Nobody expected another hand-to-hand fight, but Buckley proved it could happen. Better prepared than surprised. U-66's wreck was never found. She went down in 17 degrees 17 minutes north, 32 degrees 24 minutes west. Depth approximately 3,000 meters. Too deep for salvage or exploration in 1944. Maybe accessible with modern equipment, but nobody's looked. The wreck isn't the story, the fight is. Those 16 minutes when modern naval warfare became ancient, when technology failed and humans prevailed through courage and improvisation. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about destroyer crews who fought with coffee mugs and courage. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Lieutenant Commander Brent Abel and his crew don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.